What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It is time to start getting our T56 back together now. I've got my rebuild kit from Marwood Automotive along with my first through to fourth Synchro pressure rings and also a new third to fourth Selector ring. So that's going to replace the one that was a bit worn out when we tore it down. And as far as fifth and sixth goes for now, I'm just going to not bother with them and I'm just going to keep out of fifth and sixth because it's going in a drift car with 3 to 7 diff gears. So first through to fourth should be fine for me to use. And I should be able to keep myself out of fifth and sixth. So that's basically my plan because in order to buy a new main shaft or even to get this one machined, it was just starting to get way too expensive for the basically intended purpose for the gearbox. So it's just a matter of putting it back together with fresh first through to fourth and utilize that, and hopefully it lasts a fair while. So first thing we need to do is start getting all of our Selector ring setups back together with our new pressure rings and our new keys. So that's what I'm going to do, get them laid out, all ready to go, and then we'll start putting everything back onto our main shaft and start getting this box back together. Alright, so we'll start with first to second Selector ring. So here's your bare Selector ring as it sits. This is your inner sort of piece. As you can see, you've got in it your 3 areas for keyways pretty much to go, or keys. And you'll actually notice that inside the Selector ring there's 3 actual, I suppose, divots or dents around it. This is actually where your keys are meant to sit. So it's important that you line this up with the centerpiece because that's where your keys sit, and that's actually what holds the Selector ring in whatever gear you have engaged. So first thing to do is line up those 3 keys with those 3 divots with the inner piece. So you sit the Selector ring where it needs to be in relation to those 3 divots. Sit in your keys. And I'll show you how we put our pressure springs in. So you can see on your Selector ring here, one end you've got that little tang. The other end's obviously flat. Now what you do is just that little tang sits inside the back of the key, like so, and then that spring just runs around all 3 keys, like so. Oh, that didn't go in properly, I'm going to have to use 2 hands, but you can see what I mean by that. Alright, so you can see I've got that sat in there, and that's where it starts with that tang. So this is quite an important part of this as well. So I've started there, and it's gone around clockwise, or sorry, anti-clockwise. And so what you need to do is basically pick up the whole assembly, flip it over and put it back down, and you run the spring for the other side, you run the tang in the same key and then run it the same way, and that way they're opposing each side so there's even pressure on all of them. And it's pretty important that you get that right. So you can see here, that's what it looks like when it's all back together, and you can see at the top there where that tang starts at that top key and then goes to the left. Why is this in super wide? Hold on, that's better. So now you can see here where that tang starts up the top and runs around all the keys that way, anti-clockwise, and then if I flip it that way, that tang starts at the top and goes the same way. So it means that these are both acting opposing. You can see that, which means there's even pressure on all 3 keys. So it's very important to get that pretty right, and that's your first to second Selector ring assembly back together. So now I'll do my third and fourth with my brand new Selector ring here from the States, and get third and fourth back together as well. There you have it, that's new 3 and 4 back together as well. So we've got here 5 and 6, which I still have to take off the 5 and 6 shaft. The extension shaft, I should say. Now the keys and the springs for 3, 4, 5, 6 and reverse are all the same, and 1 and 2 are different, so you just got to watch for that. But apart from that, they all work the same. The principle behind every one of them is the same, and it's the same the way they all go together, essentially. There you go, that's 5, 6 back together. While I'm at it, I'm just going to put the 5 and 6 extension shaft straight back together the way I just took it apart, just because nothing else on that shaft is getting replaced, so it's going to be much more convenient for me to just put it back together as I just pulled it apart, while it's fresh in the brain. So we've got here our fresh caged needle roller bearings from Melwood Automotive. So you've got to be really careful with these that you don't knock the needles out of their seats in the cage. So that's going to be nice and fresh. Now I'm only going to replace the needle rollers in this gearbox just because I've inspected all the tapered rollers and they're all fine. None of them particularly need to be replaced. And the advantage that gives me is that without having to replace the tapered roller bearings, I then do not require to re-shim the box, so I don't have to re-shim the box, which is going to basically speed up the whole process of the rebuild a lot more, and just makes it a lot easier and cheaper for me. So I've inspected all the tapered roller bearings, none of them scored, they're all fine, and they're just one of those things they don't necessarily need to be replaced if they're not worn. As far as the needle rollers, I'm just going to replace them while they're out anyway, while I'm going, just because it makes it easier. Obviously as I go, I put the old ones to the side, and yeah, that's what I'm doing here. So we've got new snap rings, all new snap rings. As far as putting the snap rings back in, what I like to do is, you'll see there's a taper where the snap rings basically open up there. I try and put the taper facing down from where you're putting it on, so that if ever you're trying to get it out, basically the idea is as you spread the snap ring, it spreads and tries to push it up out of where it is seated, which makes it a lot easier. If it's flipped upside down, you're trying to get it out of somewhere. If you're trying to spread that and then it's trying to push it back down into away from where you're trying to get it out, it's going to be a real pain. So that's what I try and do, is always make sure that your tapers are towards the top, so that it pulls out of where it's seated nice and easy. Alright, so I'll put this back together. We've got our fresh needle roller bearing on there. Put our gear back over the top. Synchro is on. Nice and easy. Selector ring. On it goes. Nice and beautiful. Brand new snap ring again. And then we have the next gear to go back on, again with its new needle roller bearing. Alright, so now the reverse selector, same thing as 5.6, but as we stated at the start, reverse, the backside of it's just got a plate over it, because the backside does nothing. So what I'm going to do is actually flip the selector ring over, because these rings, the teeth on this side of the ring are a bit worn from trying to get into reverse. Obviously this side's brand new because it never does anything, so I plan on flipping the ring over, rebuilding this selector ring, and that way getting into reverse should be good as gold. Alright, so from here it's basically time to start putting back together the main shaft. So the first thing is going to be replace the needle roller bearing for third on the main shaft. Nice and on there, nice and good for third gear. As far as third gear synchros, we've got a new one, so we'll put our new third gear synchro on there. From there, obviously the selector ring goes over. And I believe I'm probably going to have to press this back on, as I had to press it off. So the next one we're going to do is second gear. As you can see, second gear synchro is like first, where they're actually a 4-part synchro. I've got a new pressure plate for each one, and it's also the same needle roller bearing as third gear is. So it goes just on the back side of the same part of the shaft. So time to press that back on and put the new synchro in it. Alright, so it's time to put first, second selector ring back in. Now what I'm going to do here is put the worn side towards first gear this time, because obviously you're more likely to be stopped or slowed down a great deal more going into first gear than second. So it makes a lot more sense to put the better teeth on the second gear side, because they're going to be a lot smoother to engage then. Alright, so we got this on. Now it's time to go press that in the same way I did the last one. And then the main shift's almost assembled to the point where it's ready to go back in the case. Alright, time to get these snap rings back on. Anyhow, that's about as assembled as the main shaft gets while it's outside of the case. Now it's pretty much ready to go back into the case while we continue our assembly of this gearbox. Alright, so next thing to do is the input shaft seal. So I've got a new seal here. Find an appropriately sized socket to just sort of tap it in, be very gentle. And I'm just going to clean up the surface there with some brake cleaner and a clean rag. Nice and clean in there now. So obviously with seals it's pretty important to try and tap them in pretty evenly, make sure they don't cock to one side. Alright, next we're going to do is just put some rubber grease on the outside of the seal just to help it seat nice and easy. Hammering in nice and evenly until your seal's home there. That's one input shaft seal done. After that, obviously we got some rubber grease. We also put it on the inside of the seal on the running surface for the input shaft. And it just stops any sharp edges or any dry spots grabbing the seal on startup or doing anything nasty to the seal it shouldn't be doing. So next thing, we've got our shims and our bearing shells to put back in for our tapered rollers. Make sure they're nice and clean. Just a little tap, very gentle with those. That's your 2 bearing shells and shims back in, which is ace. Now it's time to get the input shaft back in. So, in goes our input shaft, i.e. 4th gear. Just like so. He sits in there very nicely. Obviously, throw away the old 4th synchro. We have a new one for that. Alright, Right, the rest of the main shaft goes back in where it needs to be. Got here our counter shaft, and he just sits in there for now, like so. And we start to get our clutch forks and selector forks and everything ready to go. Righto, so here we have our forks, our selector forks. Obviously we're going to replace our fork pads. It's pretty easy. You will see on the new fork pads, one side has basically two divots or protruding little grabs or tabs on them. Those tabs go, you can see, what over here, on the top side, you see when you take them off anyway. Just pay attention to that when you're taking it apart, or when you're taking your pads off. Pay close attention to that so you make sure you get them right when you put them back on. But you can see when you take them off, got your holes in there for your two little tabs. And this part gets a bit tricky. Alright, so that's pretty much done. So now the rear of the housing bearing just goes back on. Presses down like so. Get a little groove there, that houses just a little rubber ring. On there like so. That's everything on those shafts that goes into this front bit of the housing. So now it's just a matter of getting all these clutch forks back together again. Alrighty, so we're at the part now where we're just about ready to start putting it back together. I've just test fitted the case for now just to make sure everything's sort of alright in there. Now down here you can see, it's a bit hard to see with the camera, but basically these are actually locating pins for the way the shift rails work. So you gotta just shine a torch in there and make sure they're lined up. When I take this back off, I'll show you whereabouts they actually line up. But I've just put this back together just to make sure. I didn't RTV it or anything yet, so now I'm going to pull it back off and actually RTV it and start buttoning it up. And that's yeah, we're getting there. So alright, so with this apart, you can see this one here, this locator lines up with this line here, basically just stops this moving that way, and this one here actually lines up in there. So as you can see, once them locating pins are in, it really restricts how this all moves about. Another pro tip with when you put this case on is make sure your rail and your selector assembly is in neutral. It makes this little check ball a lot easier to get in if this is already in neutral. If you accidentally have this locked into another gear, it makes this a real pain in the ass. So another tip there. So now I'm just going to clean up these surfaces with some brake clean and RTV it up and try and get this back together. As you would have seen it coming apart, it's a real pain to actually get this whole thing all together at once, but you're gonna have to deal with it and make it happen. But that's what we're up to now. So as you can see, it's a bit of a ginning around to try and get this in and get the check ball in all at the same time. Obviously it helps if you've got an extra pair of hands. And that's pretty much it. So from here again, make sure you're lined up with those 2 alignment bolts, which we are pretty well. Should be fine. So the next thing's going to pretty much be to get those back in. Alright, it's the same thing with these. I like to just put them in, do them up just to make sure they locate before you go putting your thread locker, fucking thread lock on. And then you can just sort of undo them out and beat them up and then put them back in. But obviously it's better than putting a heap of thread lock on them and then finding out that they clash or don't quite go in. So basically the order of which that I like to do things obviously is test fit this first, make sure you're confident that you haven't missed anything. Then obviously pull it back off, or while you're test fitting make sure you're lined up so that when you pull it off you can fix if you're not lined up at all. Then obviously I put my RTV on after I clean the surfaces, put the case back on. As you go, you've got to put this in the check ball back on. As we know, that's a real pain. But then what I like to do is sit it on the dowels. That's where it's located, it's fine. Then I like to get in my locator pins, and that way I can make sure that they're in where they need to be before I go buttoning up the actual case, because once you button up, that's pretty much it. So basically locate them, make sure they're good. Once you're confident they're right, button up the case. Once the case is buttoned up, and basically you've got all the backwards pressure on these roller bearings and everything that's inside that case is held in nice and tight. Everything's located, nothing's flopping around. Then you can lay the box down. You can put in your collet pin that you need to put in on that. You can hammer that in, tap that in, and basically then sand it back up. And when we focus on the tail housing part of the box. So, but basically, as I stated, not doing much with 5th and 6th because they're overdrives anyway. And for my application, it's not going to be a big deal. It wasn't worth spending the money on a new main shaft to fix that vibration. So basically, everything from there down, it's nice and fresh synchros, all that jazz. And basically this stuff is just going to go back together with fresh needle rollers and some fresh clutch fork, selector fork pads. But apart from that, that's pretty much how it's going to be. So we're getting there, just got to torque these up to spec. Alright, also doing these case bolts up to 35 foot-pounds, probably a bit of overkill, but alright, so we case bolts done up 35 foot-pounds. These guys are done up just as tight as I could get them with a 3/8 ratchet with my hands. And the cotter pin's in, check ball's in, so first stage has pretty much been done successfully. So now it's time to work on the rest of this crap. Righto, so we've got a lot of this assembled. Obviously this is all a real prick. You've got to have like 5 hands to actually get everything in there. It's a real pain in the ass, but you've got to persist and get it done and yell and swear and have a lot of fun. So now it's time to actually get the reverse selector on with the reverse shifter fork, and then basically the reverse gear and just all the new snap rings on the way up, and then basically work back to our reluctor wheel for the speedo is where we're working back to at the moment. So you can see the way the reverse, I suppose, synchro is. It's just sort of like a pressure plate. See how it's a bit of a weird shape? Basically the reason they do that is so that it locks it out of reverse. So reverse doesn't actually have a synchro where it'll slow it down enough to engage unless you're pretty much stopped. It's basically so that it's a reverse lockout. You cannot select reverse while you're driving because it will not go into gear. And that's all that is. It's just a pressure ring that runs on the gear. So I've got a new one of them, I'll replace that. Alright, time to do the output shaft seal. Now just doing this literally exactly the same way that I did the input shaft seal. Exactly the same thing. Clean it up with brake fluid, a little bit of rubber grease, just to help it get home. And just a little taparoo, tap it in, and it'll fit like a thumb in a bum. Alright, so now I'm just going to clean up this mating surface and RTV it the same way I did the last one. Alrighty, we're definitely getting to the pointy end of this now. Just done up all the tail housing bolts. I did them up to 27 Newton meters. 27 foot-pound, not Newton meters. So yeah, now I'm just going to lay this down, put on my cover plate. And I'll lay it down, put on my cover plate, put on my shift bushing, and I'm not going to do my shifter. I'll do my shifter another day because it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm very tired. So I'm going to finish this gearbox off, get it sealed up for the most part, and then go to bed. I put all the sensors back in as well, speed signal, all that sort of thing. That allows us to go back in. Righto guys, so the camera went flat last night, but as you can see, it's all back together. The only thing I have left to put in is the shifter and rebuild the shifter setup, but I'm not going to do that at the moment because the shifter's going to be in the way of me getting the gearbox into the car. So that's how it's going to be for now. Just run all the sensors and everything back in, it's all torqued up, buttoned up, ready to go. So that's the T56 rebuilt.